We're talking today about risk and reward, and specifically about women and our relationship to risk, especially in business. And what lessons can we learn from Caribbean women in particular around entrepreneurship, risk, and reward? So let me just start a little bit with my own risk taking and my decision to leave the Branson Center. I actually, in 2019, for most of 2019, I had no thoughts of leaving my job. I really loved leading the team. I loved our mission of empowering entrepreneurs and helping them to scale up through capital and training. And it wasn't until I went on a trip to Spain in May of 2019, that something started being birthed inside of me, this compelling feeling that I had to shake up my life and do something different. I had lived in Spain in college in my third year for a full year in college. And in 2019, it was the first time I had been back to Spain since leaving in 2004. So 15 years had gone by. And Spain, when I went back there, it was my happy place. I was filled with life and joy and energy, the food, the culture, the flamenco, the music, the people, the art, the architecture. I loved it. And so I realized that being in my job, I was kind of in zombie mode, right? Work, home, gym, work, home, gym. And I actually wanted to feel life again. And this speaks to my personal core values, which when I stepped into a leadership role at the Branson Center, I had to step away a little bit from some of those core values, my number one value being freedom. So I wanted that location independent life again. And in fact, I had planned to move back to Spain this year. I was going to move in March, and then the pandemic hit. So that was kind of the beginning of me stepping out from a traditional career path into an entrepreneurial path. And then, of course, over the last 7 years that I had been at the Branson Center working with entrepreneurs, I had time to really think about what business model would I use for my own venture, and what opportunity do I see and what space do I want to step into that would give me the life and give me the core values that I wanted of freedom, time, wealth, and location independence. And so I happened upon and decided to pursue the coaching and course model. And I ended up raising funding to do it. I raised some pre-seed funding, and I'll talk a little bit about that. True entrepreneurial style, went and pitched to investors, got investors, raised money, and I launched my business. And I did all of this during the pandemic. So talk about risk, right? Right as I stepped out of my nice, safe, cushy job, my glamorous job, right as I stepped out of that into becoming an entrepreneur, right in the middle of raising funding, the pandemic hit, which created a whole other level of risk and decision-making with risk. And I was able to close on my funding round and launch my business in April. And the funds hit my account in May during 2020. So I want to talk about what my own journey looks like with risk and reward, as well as what we're seeing more broadly with women entrepreneurs in the Caribbean and what risk and reward looks like there. So this is a quote that I kind of came up with because this entire year has been me living with low-grade anxiety. So there was anxiety when the pandemic hit. There was anxiety when, will I raise the money or won't I raise the money? There's anxiety with, will I grow my business and meet my targets that I've set with my investors? There's anxiety around, are my clients happy? So to be an entrepreneur means coping with this anxiety around success and failure and every day. And that is a risk that a lot of people can see from the outside and really affects their decision on whether to become an entrepreneur or not. And risk, anxiety, and stress all play a role in women's decision to become entrepreneurs. And I will talk some more about that as well. So what is risk in a career, right? So a career is the vehicle that through which you exchange your talent, your ideas, and your labor for money. So that vehicle can be a traditional career path, or it can be entrepreneurship. Risk in your career is when you face a decision with a high probability of failure that can lead to a substantial loss of income and status. That is how I define risk in a career, right? So stepping out of a safe, secure job with a steady income into your own business comes with substantial risk because there is a high probability of failure that can lead to a substantial loss of income and status and prestige that you had with your traditional career path. But in exchange for that risk, that high probability of failure, the potential payoff, the reward has to be very high. You have to be able to make outsized returns in income and status for that risk to make sense. And so risk and reward go hand in hand. When you stay in the tried and true path, your reward, your outcomes are lower than oftentimes than when you take the risk to step out into something that has potentially a very high payoff. But that comes with, of course, the risk of failure. I'm going to look at the comments soon. I see the comments going off, but here are some of the decisions that entrepreneurs face, and particularly women entrepreneurs, and they're dealing with when they're facing the anxiety and stress of these risky decisions. Should I maintain a traditional career, or should I become an entrepreneur? Should I bootstrap and build my business organically, or should I get external funding into my business? What business model do I choose that enables me to live the life that I actually want to live? Many entrepreneurs choose the wrong business model and end up getting trapped in their business. So that's a big risk as well on the business model side. Should I take this project on, or should I take that project on if you're in a traditional career? Should I pursue this client or that one? And now in the pandemic, many entrepreneurs are facing the decision of, should they persist and try to stay open and keep puttering along and keep trying in this very difficult environment, or should they close their business and try something else? So all of these decisions are very high risk decisions that come with a heavy emotional impact, a lot of stress, and a lot of anxiety. I kind of emphasize the anxiety piece and the stress piece because women and men make decisions very differently under stress and under anxiety. Studies have shown that under stress, men take more risks, so they become more risk-seeking, and women take fewer risks under stress. So this stress level in relation to these different decisions really determine the outcome, the difference in the outcome between women and men in terms of risk and outcomes. Okay, I see a lot of questions in the chat. So I'm going to get into the research behind risk and reward and women, and particularly how it relates to Caribbean women entrepreneurs. But let me just jump into the chat a little bit. So Carlota from Honduras, Vanessa from Trinidad. Okay, awesome. All right, great. Okay, so here are some of the research behind women in business and management. The International Labor Organization did a study on women in business and management and found that Jamaica has the highest percentage of women managers in the world at close to 60%. 60% of all managers in Jamaica are women. Jamaica is very unique in that regard. In fact, the top three of the top 4 countries in the study are from the Caribbean. Jamaica was number 1, Colombia number 2, Bahamas was 3rd, and Barbados was 4th. So you can look up this study, International Labor Organization. Also from the Caribbean, Dominican Republic had the highest percentage of women in senior roles at 55.8% in senior executive positions. So the Caribbean overperforms on women in management, in corporate management roles, right? To a high degree. The Caribbean leads the world in terms of gender representation at the management level. However, when you look at the very top positions, companies listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, these ratios change dramatically. On the main market, this is our largest stock exchange with the largest size companies by revenue and capitalization. On our main market, less than 5% of the companies listed have a woman CEO. I think the number was 4 out of 70 companies. Crazy. On the junior market, which is smaller cap companies, less than 7% of the companies listed have a woman CEO. And in terms of board composition, it's a little bit better, but it's less than 10% women on boards on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. Now, if we look back at this figure, 60% of managers in Jamaica are women. 5% of listed companies have a woman CEO. What causes that massive gap? That is a massive ceiling that the women managers are coming up against. They're not able to break through above the management level. At the Branson Center now, let's look at the entrepreneurial data. So we have over 200 entrepreneurs in our pool at the Branson Center. And when we were focused on early stage companies with revenues less than 100,000 US dollars per year, it was roughly a 50-50 split between men and women entrepreneurs. So Michelle had opened with that great statistic that 43% of small businesses were woman owned before the pandemic, right? In Jamaica, we saw that below $100,000, 50-50 split between men and women entrepreneurs in Jamaica. However, when we shifted our focus to become more engaged in the venture capital space, we changed our threshold of revenues from 100,000 to 250,000. And that change in revenues showed us that caused a huge change in the gender ratio of entrepreneurs, men and women entrepreneurs, right? It went from 50-50 to 80-20. Above $250,000, 80% of the companies were led by men and 20% by women, which was shocking to us. And it caused us to ask this question, why? Why was there this dramatic difference in terms of size between women-owned businesses? And I'm looking back at the stock exchange numbers, and you see that as the size gets smaller, you see more women in leadership positions. But at the largest companies, men are the ones that are leading. Why is that, right? So let's go with this question of why is that? I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that is. And then finally, we also looked at investors, right? So the ratio of men to women investors. So we had an investor group at the Branson Center. In that deal room, we had 25% women and 75% men. First Angels Jamaica, we have 2 angel networks in Jamaica. First Angels is the most active. It's the largest one. Their split is 20% women, 80% men. Alpha Angels Jamaica was another angel network based in Montego Bay, in the western side of the country. 10% women investors, 90% men. So again, we ask the question, why are women not showing up in these spaces where money is being put at risk? Significant amounts of money being put at risk. And I dug into the research for this presentation, and what I found was that women take fewer physical risks, so risks that would harm their physical bodies, and fewer financial risks than men. But women take more social risks and more relationship and justice related risks than men. So that is a very interesting dynamic, which goes to the core values, the difference in core values between men and women. So let's explore that a little bit more. So I'm going to break here and just take a look at the chat and ask you, Michelle, is there anything in the chat that I should pay attention to at this point?
Yes, we have a great question here from Marcia Brandon. She is asking, yes, I know that study, or she mentioned, she knows that study. However, is there equity in payment for women as well? Also, congrats to Jamaican women. I think the why is a combination of reasons, including tradition, experience, lack of money, fear, risk, adverse, etc.
Right, exactly. So is there equity in payment for women in Jamaica? That there hasn't been studies done on that. Any evidence I have would be purely anecdotal. So I can't comment. There's been like no data, no studies done on pay equity for women. But anecdotally, 60% of women as managers, it's very hard for me to even compare, because all the women I know are in kind of managerial positions, and we all as women get paid equally, but I actually don't know what the men get paid. So that's a great question. I'm guessing that there is a pay differential there as well. All right. So let's get into the why. Why do women make decisions that are leading to these different outcomes on size of their businesses and on investing and so on? Okay, so remember the decisions that you face as a woman entrepreneur, traditional career or entrepreneurship, right? So we have 60% of managers are women. They're trying to decide, should they stay in their traditional careers or should they go out and start their own companies? Should they grow their businesses organically or should they take on external funding? What business model should they choose? What projects should they choose? What clients should they choose? And should they stay open or closed during the pandemic? So these are the decisions now that women have to make. And the outcomes on size of business and the outcomes on investment are determined by how we as women make these decisions. So traditional decision making theory talks about outcomes, probabilities, and the value of winning and losing. And it assumes that people make rational decisions based on the value of different outcomes in their decision trees, right? And this decision-making theory assumes that women and men put similar values on outcomes and similar probabilities when they're determining what decisions to make, but that's actually not true. Women and men have different core values by and large. And so those decision-making processes are based on those values. And when our value systems are different, we are going to make different decisions that lead to different outcomes. So I started my career as a researcher for the book Freakonomics. So I love research and I love the theory of things. And so decisions, this is a typical decision tree, right? For a lawyer who is pursuing a case and trying to decide whether to proceed with the case or to settle the case. So we have the probabilities of winning versus losing and the value associated with each with each outcome. So you have to pay $50,000 if you lose, but if you win, you get all of these money from this calculation here. So this is how decision theory thinks about how people make decisions, right? We think about our options, we think about the costs and the probability of success. But McKinsey just put out a report recently that shows that actually people make decisions based on their core values. And they've grouped core values into 9 different broad values that you can choose from. So I've circled here the caring value and the stability value. Women tend to over-index on caring for others. They are often the caregivers in their family, and because of that role as a caregiver, they over-index on the need for stability to take care of the people that they love, that they are the caregiver for. Meanwhile, men tend to over-index on some other elements here: achievement, respect, enjoyment, right? So if we have a fundamentally different decision-making criteria, we're going to have fundamentally different outcomes. So to answer the question, do women take fewer risks than men? The answer is both yes and no. No, we don't take fewer risks. We take different risks. And the risks that women take are not valued or tracked by society in the same way that when we're looking at the risks that men take, right? So when we think about risk, we think about physical harm, we think about financial loss, and those are very masculine ways of thinking about risk. So on those metrics, yes, women do take fewer risks on the physical side and on the financial side. This is changing though. The financial side, we're seeing women now in this decade becoming more willing to put capital at risk than ever before. But the risks that we are willing to take are not tracked and not valued by society in the same way as these physical and financial risks. I see the chat going off, so let me just take a break here. Okay, Lawrence. Right, yes, great. So Cyan is here because she wants to enter the business world and wants to gain as much information as she can before she does that. All right, wonderful. So as I think it was Marcia that put it in the chat, there are some hypotheses on why this exists. Why do our core values differ so much? Because our core values feed into our decision-making criteria, which result in the outcomes that we see in the business world and in the investment world. So there are a number of reasons why our core values are different. Historically, women just really joined the workforce in masses in the last 50 years, right? So we are just in the process of accumulating personal wealth as a tribe, as a group. And we're now just in this decade starting to become more philanthropic and thinking more as investors of wealth rather than just accumulating wealth through our work. So we're now more recently joining the workforce. The other reason, the other why the core values are so different, when women remain the primary caregivers in the household, and until that changes, we may not see significant changes in these outcomes in entrepreneurship and risk. And Michelle said it in the opening, in the pandemic, we are seeing more women leave the workforce than ever before. Since we started entering the workforce, the pandemic is causing the women to drop out of the workforce in droves because the demarcation between work and home no longer exists. And with children home from school, the burden of caregiving and working has become overwhelming for women, and they're choosing their families and their children over the working world. And that is a choice we've had to make throughout history. So we need, as a community, to solve that problem in order to engage this highly effective, highly productive part of the workforce in a different way. If we continue working in the same way we've always worked, we're going to lose women. So we have to change the way we work to keep our women, right? Other hypotheses: women seek more safety and more support, more psychological safety, more support. So that's why they value stability so much, because for their children as well, but also personally, also societally, we're cultured to be more of a stabilizing force while the men go out and hunt and gather and take risk. So we're trying to break out of that mold and that conditioning, that social conditioning that has been centuries in the making. And finally, another hypothesis is that women tend to be more philanthropic when they do invest their money. They tend to do it through charitable means and less so through return on investment and investing in businesses. So these are all hypotheses behind this differential, and a lot more work and a lot more research needs to be done to really understand the root causes and how we can shift them to get better outcomes for women as entrepreneurs, as leaders, and as investors as well. Okay, so I've said a lot. Here, I'd like to just pause for a minute and get a little discussion going. So Michelle, what's happening in the chat?
The discussion is going. So so we have some interesting comments, kind of, I think everyone was kind of processing your first question. And we have Radha Das got back to us and said that she's from Trinidad. And the reason for attending this webinar is to be giving some motivation, some insight as to the way forward during these times. Sean Burke, who is going to be studying at UCW this fall, so happy to have you here in the webinar, said that she's here for a simple reason. She'd like to enter the business world. So I think this is all very valuable information for all of us. And we've had some feedback kind of about, do women take more risks fewer risks than men? And we have some feedback here. Jan Doe said she agrees, but they take more risks, but different kinds of risks.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Another person said they agree that, or they think that women take fewer risks overall. Fiola, who's another UCW, soon to be UCW student this fall, says that we seem to be more critical thinkers. Another individual mentioned women tend to be more financially conscious. We have an interesting insight here from Cavell, who I believe mentioned they're from Jamaica. As a woman entrepreneur, I believe I am risk-taking. Mm-hmm. My situation is more of the rate of risk-taking. I take them, but slowly weighing everything.
Yes, yes. And a lot of that comes from the need for stability and security. And where does that come from, right? So I see people agreeing, yes, we don't take as many financial risks, we're more analytical. And that comes out in the research as well. And the question behind that is why? Why do we take longer to take a risk? Why do we have to analyze every outcome before we jump? Whereas some men will just jump recklessly, right? And when we start to dig into the why, that is where the insight comes. For me personally, it is I am a stabilizing force in my family, right? I help take care of my parents. And so having a massive financial loss is not good for my family. And therefore, I'm not going to be as risk seeking as some of my counterparts may be who are more willing to lose it all. However, I have taken many risks in getting investments, starting a business in a pandemic, leaving my 9 to 5 job. And what allowed me to take that risk? I don't have dependents myself, my kids. I don't have kids. I'm more free to move around as I see fit in the world. And so all these different factors feed into those risk decisions. And for me, the caregiving piece is the real insight here.
I think, and that's what I was going to mention, that I think your insight as to, you know, what's the reason for all this. Of course, it's a complex answer, but one big reason is evolution, and simply women, we evolved to be caregivers. And you know, you mentioned even though you don't have children, you're caring for your parents, you know, or of course caring for children or caring for our partners. You know, often females are kind of the rock of their family. So I think that it makes sense, evolutionarily speaking, that we aren't going to go out and, you know, put our family and our home at risk. So we have a lot of comments coming in. This is great. Everyone's
right. So I see some
thinking,
questions around investment decision, which is my next component. And one thing I do want to say is that this is changing, right? The past 50 years of women in the workforce has now meant that men, in some instances, were before the pandemic starting to take a step back and become primary caregivers while women led in the workplace. And we were seeing before the pandemic a shift in these gender identities culturally that was very heartening. And we're seeing where women are making different decisions on marriage and children and career than they were before. So all of these forces come into play here, and we can't discount these cultural gender forces that are at play.
So I have a question here. Is it now a good time to ask?
Well, I want to jump into the financial investment side, and then we're going to take all of those questions.
Lovely.
All right. Okay. So on the investment side, I saw someone bring this up. There is a disparity between men and women entrepreneurs who seek funding. So at the Branson Center, we saw even amongst the entrepreneurs that came through our program, there was more hesitation amongst the women entrepreneurs to seek funding than there was for the men. And there are a number of reasons for this. One is the pool of investors is dominated by men in the Caribbean, as we saw on the earlier slides. And elsewhere, right? It's the same in the US, it's the same all over the world. The investor pool is dominated by men. What does that mean? This creates a very different experience for women who are going through the investment process. That process of pitching and asking and negotiating and aggression and competitiveness, those are all very male-dominated traits. So the investing experience itself is something that turns women off, where they don't even want to go out and seek investment if they're going to come up against a lot of men who are going to be very aggressive towards them and their businesses, right? So that experience actually turns women off from seeking external funding. The other reason that we're seeing this differential is there's a low trust environment in the Caribbean between entrepreneurs and investors in general. So in that low trust environment, who benefits from that, right? Where if we're seeing that culturally women tend to be more relational, more social, more about community, more about trust, a low trust investing environment will not compel women to go out and seek funding either, if they're going to have their trust broken. And finally, we're not seeing enough success stories of women who've used funding to scale. funding is such an important part of successful outcomes for entrepreneurs. And when we look at the Jamaica Stock Exchange, which is a funding mechanism, and we see 4% of women CEOs on the Jamaica Stock Exchange, and we see 7% on the Junior Stock Exchange, we're not seeing enough success stories of women getting funding and scaling their businesses and going public, and we need to see more of that. The few women pioneers that we do see are just incredible stories that are super inspiring. One of them is my friend, Kamala Bennett, who runs the lab in Jamaica. They went public last year and quadrupled her share price in the space of 3 months after going public, and has had huge, like 100% increase in profitability quarter over quarter since she's been public. And that is a young woman, a millennial run business that is listed on the Jamaica Stock Exchange. So stories like that empower other women to think and believe, well, I can go through that process too. It's not too intimidating. It's not too aggressive for me. I want to go through the a similar experience and grow my business to that extent. But we need to find those stories and bring them out more. So my personal experience, I'll share with you. I decided to raise $150,000 in pre-seed funding for Soul Career in order to give myself one full year of running it full time and building it into what I knew it could be. And I created a deck. I went through the whole investment experience. I did projections, financial projections, and I bounced the idea off both men and women to test the waters and to see if there was appetite for doing this pre-seed round in Soul Career. What is interesting in that story is that I myself didn't go through the regular investment process of pitching, doing a hard pitch to the angel groups and to the high net worth individuals. I did more of a discussion. What do you think? What are your thoughts on my deck? And to test the waters and see what the appetite was. So that's very interesting from my perspective. And what I noticed personally is that the men who I discussed the idea with offered to invest, while the women offered to connect me with their network. So the women did not offer to invest at the rates that the men did. And I found that very interesting because it mirrors this small percentage of women as investors. And for me, that goes back to the willingness to put capital at risk, right? So there's one thing around the accumulation of capital, whether through your career or as an entrepreneur. And then there's another decision process that goes into putting capital at risk to invest in other businesses and other entrepreneurs to see them grow and become successful as well. And that decision metric to put capital at risk, I find, is much harder for women so far in the region than for men. And another question is, why are women unwilling to put capital at risk in that way? Women are more concerned with the preservation of capital than with growing and putting it at risk and getting that outsized return and reward. Why is that? Again, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why that is. In the end, I did get investment from 3 investors, and they were all men, surprisingly. Right? All men from the Caribbean, Black men who are willing to put their money behind Soul Career because they believed in the entrepreneur and they believed in the business model and the opportunity. And again, I really am so proud and grateful that these 3 men stepped up to the plate in this way. But I'm always wondering, why didn't the woman step up in this way, right? So I want to leave a lot of time for questions. So I'm leaving you guys with this parting thought to write your comments in the chat box. What needs to happen for women to be more willing to take financial risk, right? One financial risk is leaving a traditional career to launch your own business. Another financial risk is going out and raising funding from other people. And another financial risk is when you've accumulated capital, putting that capital at risk and investing yourself in other entrepreneurs. What needs to happen for women to be more willing to take these risks? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the chat. Michelle, do you have an answer to that?
we don't have any answers from the participants yet, but oh, they're coming in. I was gonna say, I think that one major factor, my personal thought would be something you see is an important factor, especially in underdeveloped countries versus developed countries, is childcare, free childcare. So, you know, women knowing that their home is taken care of and that they can go out and take those risks, I think is a huge factor. We have
Yes.
some other, yeah.
Yes, I'm seeing some great comments in the chat that women need to be paid more so they can accumulate more wealth in order to take those risks. A change in mindset needs to occur from the investor's side, right? And I want to double click on this a little bit, in that one of the articles I read in preparation for this presentation talked about how the venture capital experience inherently has gender bias in it. This is the venture capital experience in Silicon Valley. When there is a pitch process, women underperform and men overperform. And this is a result of confidence differentials. This is a result of there's so many men in on the investment side that there's a bias on the male side for certain markers of masculine kind of aggression and overconfidence and ego. And so they tend to fund men more because there's more men on the funding side. So there are all these reasons that the pitch process itself has inherent gender bias. So there are two things we need to change to equalize these outcomes. One is the way we work has to change to support women more. And two, the way we invest has to change for women to come into the fold a lot more.
Yes, there's a number of really interesting responses coming in. One person mentioned education on entrepreneurship and investment, especially for women starting early on. A number have mentioned that many women don't have as much disposable income as men, so they're not able to invest. So these are all important factors, and of course, safety net has come up as well. You know, making sure that you know there are kind of those social safety nets in case, you know, someone takes a risk and it doesn't work out.
Mm-hmm. And I just saw Carla say she needs to get a wife. We need to have wives so that we have the time and focus to put into our businesses. So if we had wives at home, we would be able to do that too.
Carla Turnquest is one of our very, very close partners in the Bahamas, and that woman is amazing. She's an entrepreneur, mother, wife. She works, I was talking about working double shifts, she works 4 shifts.
Right, yes. So I know you wanted to do kind of a panel discussion here, Michelle. So let's open it up. Let's bring Lawrence back into the fold. And
hello, everybody.
Hi, Lawrence.
Still here. I was listening. Very interesting talk. Really, really interesting. Like, I didn't know some of those. It's crazy, you know, like, I mean, I wanted to ask you a question as well, Lisandra. Like,
sure.
You said that women like to share, right? Or like share their connections,
Yes.
Would you consider this as social capital? And it's actually, if you put a value to it, isn't it like really, really valuable? Like in terms of like growing a business?
Absolutely. So that network that you have is capital for sure. And women do tend to build more deeper relationships that they cultivate over time. So they tend not to go as broad in terms of networking, but they tend to go quite deep. The challenge that in terms of moving that capital into actual money, monetizing that social capital, is that the market doesn't value that as much yet, right? When we look at the investing process, it values aggression, overconfidence, ego, traction, right? All these very masculine definitions of success. And so we need to change what success looks like in order to bring more women into the fold, I think. Because the way women think, when you look at the data, women in leadership positions lead to higher profitability in companies, right? EBITDA is 15% higher when you have more than 30% of your leadership positions filled by women. So this caution, this stability, this security, this analysis that women bring to the leadership sphere actually enables better outcomes, because the risk-seeking behavior of the men combined with the analysis of the woman leads to better decisions overall. So we need to be able to empower women to bring that to the table more.
Great stuff.
Very well said. And I have another. Yeah, I have I'm kind of filtering through the questions here. So I have a question here. I wanted to ask you, Lisandra, from Janine in Barbados. She said, starting a business in a pandemic is high risk, as we've discussed. How do you deal with the anxiety?
Oh. Right. So yes, my first quote was that as an entrepreneur, you're dealing with anxiety every day, right? Every day. This is the reality. And I became a Buddhist in 2009. And actually mindfulness principles have really helped me, because you don't get attached to the thoughts that attack you. So how I think about these anxious thoughts is that these thoughts are separate from me, and the core of myself, I trust myself, right? I trust what I'm capable of doing. And instead of believing the thoughts, I need to bring myself back to center through my routines, mindfulness, stretching, yoga, working out. Working out is so important for your mind, not for your body. And bring yourself back to yourself whenever you feel yourself getting pulled into stress and anxiety. So you have to be very intentional about cultivating those routines that help you to stay centered.
Very interesting thing about mindfulness, because would you consider that more of like like something that you will learn from women leaders, like being centered? Because stress is not a new thing. It's been there for a long time, and we always pressure ourselves, right? Being men and women, we always pressure ourselves. But is this more of like something that we can learn from female leaders? This kind of balance, this being centered feeling, Lisandra? Because
Great
I think
question.
it's great, yeah.
I think in general, across the board, especially coming out of the pandemic, people have put a much higher value on mental health and the impact that mental health has on outcomes. Mental health meaning management of stress, management of anxiety, etc. Women, what we've done in leadership is bring more openness, more vulnerability, and more authenticity to leadership. We're not as ego driven. We don't have the mask of impenetrability on that many men do, right? Women are more willing to let down that mask and show the real deal. And I think that style of leadership is very much coming into fashion now, because our teams or employees want to feel that connection, and they want to feel a part of a mission that's greater than themselves, and they want to understand, they feel that their leaders understand them and can connect with them as well. Millennials are really driving that shift. And so we see that openness that women bring to leadership is now enabling a conversation around mental health. I don't think that women are less stressed out than men. Women have more responsibilities on the caregiving side, so they cannot leave work at work. They go home, or they are at home, working at home with the kids. They are very stressed out, but they're more willing to talk about what they need to perform better.
Is vulnerability a strength? Do you agree?
Absolutely, I think so, but
Yes.
not always. It depends on the culture that you're a part of. So if you're in a very traditional organization that does not value that openness, that is very formal and very kind of cold and needing that separateness, then your vulnerability is not going to be welcomed in that environment. And that is why that is my assumption why you see so few women leading Fortune 500 companies is because of that formal, traditional, mask up approach that pervades corporate America and corporate Jamaica. And I'm hopeful that the pandemic will change that, which will allow women to come back to the table and say, this is an organization that I can be a part of. The last thing I'll say on this is that women and minorities do not feel a sense of belonging in corporate America, period, right? And that sense of belonging is what people are craving now more than ever from their careers. So if corporate America wants to keep their talent, their women and their minority talent, they need to foster a more open culture where everybody belongs.
Very good views, very good views. Questions, Michelle, down there?
I have a question from the audience. What do you think has been the most intrinsic thing, whether it be social skills, marketing strategy, etc., that has helped you create and sustain your business?
Sorry, I was reading another question while you were asking. So
No worries.
Can you ask that again, Michelle?
Yeah. What do you think is the most intrinsic thing, whether it be social skills, a marketing strategy, etc., that's helped you create and sustain your business?
Oh dear. Oh, sorry about that. You have me thinking. I think the number one skill that I am trying to cultivate. So I am confident in my strategic skills. I'm confident in my ability to raise funding. I've built a network that has funded me. I'm confident in the business model that I chose. All of those are really important for setting up and sustaining a business. But what you need to make a business work long term is sales. Without sales and profitability, the business is going to die. And selling skills, right? That hunting, going out, getting clients, pitching, selling, putting up a price, that is a very kind of masculine type of energy. And it's a skill that I have had to learn. I am not strong in sales naturally. So the past year has been me learning how to sell and learning how to sell online in particular. And I would say to women who want to leave corporate world and start businesses, try to figure out where your strengths are and where you need to shore up, because sales will make or break the business. You know, if we're not around 2 years from now, it would be because of sales. So I hired a sales team to help me with sales, to shore up that weakness in my capabilities for that reason. So that would be my recommendation. There are a number of things you need, and I had a number of things, but I was missing one or two key things.
Well, it sounds like your recommendation is kind of look at what skills, because everyone's of course is different. So look at what skills you have, or what they have, and then determine what are they missing. And that leads me to a question that I have, is do you recommend starting businesses with partners? Do you suggest more going the solo route, or looking for that business partner or that group to start the venture with?
Great question. So the first thing I will say is, when you're deciding to start a business, you have to select a business model that matches your core values and gives you the things you want out of life. That's step one. Should you have a partner or not? I am 100% on the side of building a business with other people. For my days where I'm feeling down or things aren't hitting the targets that we wanted to hit, my brother is my co-founder, and I have 3 investors. Without them, I would feel very alone. And that is another kind of facet of entrepreneurship, is that it is a very lonely journey. And if you are the only one on that journey, that is what leads to people quitting in the middle, right? It becomes so hard to sustain on their own that they leave and rejoin a team in the workforce. So if you can predict that and build a team around you that supports you throughout, your likelihood of persisting is much higher. And persistence and resilience are keys to entrepreneurial success. People quit too early before they get the outcome.
I think that's a very, very good point. And I think that also something that I believe is that individuals can get that support from various places, whether it's, as you mentioned in your case, your brother, family, who's also your business partner, or your investors, or maybe someone gets it from their family, from their parents, from their partner, that kind of support, or friends to keep going along their journey.
Yes, I'm seeing 2 really good questions in the Q&A box, Michelle. So which one should I answer first? They're really good.
Let's answer
okay,
Cabell.
I have one here
From Cabell, right? Is that right? Is that from Cavell? Okay.
I have one here.
Oh,
Female risk taking is also related to culture of the family. My mother was never a risk taker. In fact, I will describe her as risk adverse. I grew up also being afraid and afraid of everything. My success in work and studies happened because of an innate fear of failing and being able to provide for myself. Do you think that failing is important in an entrepreneurial journey?
Mm-hmm. Oh gosh. Fear of failure is a hallmark of the entrepreneurial journey. People who have never failed, I don't recommend taking the leap to be an entrepreneur, because that first failure, that entrepreneurial failure, where you lose everything, your income, your status, your title, you lose everything and you get marked with failure, right? Which in the Caribbean can be a huge thing. It's a very tough thing to go through. Let's not put any sugarcoating on it. So you need a space where you can have your failures. And this is my personal opinion from seeing hundreds of entrepreneurs go through failure. I recommend, if it's possible for you, to have a space where you can fail, where it's safe to fail, and you can learn how to fail. And then you go out and be an entrepreneur and do the failures on your own, because failure is a muscle. It's a skill. Being able to fail and come back from it, fall down and get up again. Entrepreneurship is about resilience, right? So build that resilience muscle as much as you can before stepping out. Because if you don't, that first failure will lead to catastrophic emotional repercussions and will send you back into the workforce, and you may never go out again. But if you've learned to fail and bounce back in a safe environment, you're going to be able to withstand the failures that come in entrepreneurship. Inevitably, failures come in entrepreneurship.
Great. I have another question here.
Oh, I just want to answer
have...
from Esther. What does a safe space to fail look like?
Yeah,
good
okay.
question.
Yeah,
right?
it's a great question.
So for me, the Branson Center was a safe space to fail. I built many products and programs in the Branson Center, and I got paid to do that. And I had a great leader and a great team where we were in experimentation mode. So if some things failed and some things succeeded, it didn't harm my personal income or my status or my trajectory. I was able to fail in a safe space. So your career should really provide that safe space, but it depends on the culture of the organization that you're in. Alternatively, have a side hustle. Be a 10% entrepreneur before you're a 100% entrepreneur, and fail there while the failure doesn't impact you so much before you go out into it full time.
I have a follow-up question to that, because I know about some of the questions coming in different situations. So what could be a way to fail or a space to fail in if you're already a small business owner, if you're already an entrepreneur?
Yeah. If you're already an entrepreneur, is there a safe space to fail? If you're a 10% entrepreneur, if you're a side hustler, yes, it's very safe to fail in that. Experimentation is side hustling makes experimentation possible. If you are 100% entrepreneur facing failure, then you're going to have to develop your tools of resilience. The stakes of failure when you're all in are very high, right? Let's not sugarcoat that. The stakes are high. Failure, when you're in an organization reading about failure, it sounds like this, oh, it's this entrepreneur journey. You have to fail. It's great. But when you're in it and the stakes are high, you have to develop the tools of resilience, right? So you have to learn how to decouple your identity from your business and maintain your sense of self even through the failure. You have to learn how to scenario analysis and have a game plan for these different down case scenarios so that you know what actions you want to take at rock bottom, before rock bottom, and at neutral, right? You have to learn how to plan. You have to have an optimistic mindset. Well, even if this product fails or this client fails, I still have this vision and this why that's pulling me through the failures. So developing all those tools of resilience, learning how to come back to yourself and center yourself, very important if you're in it 100% already. And I have to answer Cavell's question in the Q&A box after this, which is she's in the bridal industry, which got really affected by the pandemic, right? And she had to take more risks than ever before, innovating, creating new products, creating new opportunities. She became a risk-taking machine, right? And her comment was that you have to have this internal drive and motivation in order to be able to be open to taking that risk. And my comment on that is it comes back to your purpose and your why and the vision you have for your life that is pulling you through these experiences. So if you have a very strong sense of purpose, you are higher, you're more resilient. And in fact, people who have a purpose perform 15% better on outcomes than people who don't have a strong sense of purpose. That's McKinsey's purpose study that just came out 4 months ago.
That's yeah, that's a great insight as well, and something important to keep in mind, not only of course for the bridal industry, which is so affected right now, but for a number of industries that are affected right now. I have another, I think we have time for 2 more questions because we are over our time limit, but I also want to mention that in the chat, I see really, I think the best possible outcome to this type of event, that people are learning and engaging, but also people are connecting. So I've seen a number of, entrepreneurs and connecting, and I think that is really the best thing that we can do, because at the end of the day, you know, we have to support each other to grow together and build our networks together. So I have last 2 questions here. One I have, would you say that the success of our women leaders in handling COVID-19, the focus should be on political culture and institutions which allow women to adopt a more feminine approach to leadership, to power?
Oh gosh, what a big question. The question is who's focused, right? So in terms of the government, yes. In terms of you as an individual, of course, I lobby for that with the corporates that I work with and with my interface with the government. But as an individual, your focus needs to be on your purpose, right? So yes, we're going to write the articles and we're going to push for change in corporate culture. And it's happening naturally as the pandemic evolves, but also we need to focus on building the trajectory of our lives that we want to build and designing the life and the career that we want to create. That's my take. What's your take, Michelle, Lawrence?
Michelle,
Lawrence, do you have any thoughts?
No, you first. Ladies first.
I think that, sorry, I've been reading questions here, but I think that
I put you on the spot.
I think what you mentioned before is very important, that there is that shift to, and you know, really with more millennials in the workforce, there has been a more shift to focusing on ideals and having a sense of purpose. And with that, I think women leaders are very in line with that, and it's been a natural progression, if you will. And I think that in light of COVID, it's important that we don't lose that. So, you know, in a number of women's networking groups and newsletters, you know, I think it's been kind of a cry for help. What is happening? You know, I saw a stat: 1 in 4 women in the United States is considering leaving the workforce because of COVID. And I think that we, as you mentioned before as well, that at some point you'll want to stop, it'll get hard, but you need to have that resilience and that support system in place to proceed, to, you know, go for that, you know, that new managerial position, apply for that, and also be your authentic self, be an authentic female, whatever that means to you, whether it means being supportive, compassionate.
I think that, you know, something to add to that, like, I think COVID has definitely exposed a lot of weaknesses, not just in countries, but in corporations as well. And I think the resilient ones, the ones with a diversified view, not just the leadership, but also the entry-level people who have given their ideas in the ways they work, that has been really, really valuable for the ones who are still thriving until today. Like, who are still surviving. I mean, this pandemic has definitely hit everyone. Like nobody, I would say 98% of the world has affected us, like, you know, has been affected by this pandemic. But I think that women in general, women leaders, have that empathy, have that compassion, and have that understanding. And they have provided this kind of, I would say, these are things that are not just taught, right? These are things that you adjust right, you adjust right there and then. And I think that when you apply this in a corporate setting, I would say in a situation of conflict or in a situation of difficulty, it's really valuable. This kind of sharing, when you are able to share, being able to be empathetic and compassionate. These are just, I would say, as you had mentioned, Lisandra, these are like mostly attributes of women, for example. And I think that when you apply that in a workplace, that's unforgiving. As people have mentioned the word unforgiving here, like the Caribbean is an unforgiving workforce. But yes, definitely, I think it's more of like when you apply this, it definitely helps out.
I just want to jump in here before you ask your last question, Michelle, to say that in the comments I saw this and it triggered this comment from you, which is women leaders of countries have outperformed men in the pandemic by far. Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand and Angela Merkel in Germany have outperformed Boris and Trump and all these male leaders who led with their egos, whereas the woman led with the data. And it's really kind of showing us what great woman leadership can do, not just for countries, but for corporations, as you're saying. And it's unfortunate that so many women are thinking about leaving the workforce because of their caregiving responsibilities when the outcomes are better when they're in the workforce. So again, I go back to, yes, we need to change how we work and how we invest, and who is responsible for changing that was the question we were trying to answer. And I think it is leaders, yes, men and women are responsible for that. Men have to help create the space for this change to happen.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So Michelle, you had one last, Mia Motley in Barbados. Yes, she's been fantastic too. Thank you for that, Marcia.
Yeah. Well, there's so many great questions in the chat, but we are now officially over 15 minutes over our time. So my last question is going to be, someone asked, will we be hosting another session like this? Very informative. I'm so happy that, it seems that this session has been very informative for myself. It seems like everyone in the chat agrees. And of course, this session is hosted by University Canada West. And we will be hosting another seminar next week, which will be hosted in Spanish. For those of you, Lisandra, you can come practice your Spanish. And for those of you who speak Spanish, but at UCW, we do host a number of events such as this, not all with the same entrepreneurial focus, but talking about different topics, studies in Canada, business. So we do encourage you to follow us on social media, and we'll be sending you an email after this so you can see how you can get involved with these types of events.
Something to add to that, Michelle, like the Caribbean for us is an amazing, amazing region. And we have a lot of these amazing questions, a lot of I would say a lot of exchange of ideas. It's very, very exciting for us. Now, if you want this in your countries, obviously, Lisandra, if you have time, I know you're a busy lady, but definitely we're going to be able to present, as you tell us what kind of topics will work out best for you, and we are here to support. We are here to serve you at University of Canada West. And yeah,
absolutely. Let's keep the connection going. I talk a lot about the future of work, and my company Soul Career helps professionals and executives and entrepreneurs to find their life's work. And I do a free consultation to start. So if any of you guys are interested, Michelle did one with me. She tracked. That's how she got me on this panel. She did a sneak attack.
It was honestly lovely. Not only did I get to meet Lisandra and she agreed to do this speaking engagement, but I also did a very worthwhile and very insightful session with her. So I highly recommend it.
So you can book it on soulcareer.com. Just book a free consultation with me. I would love to connect with you guys. You've been so awesome in the chat. I'd love to learn more about what all of you guys are doing.
Let's go Caribbean, right? Let's go Caribbean. It's amazing. Great vibes.
Great. Well, again, thank you everyone so much for joining us tonight. I know it's been a very interesting seminar for me, and I know we've all learned something tonight and even maybe met a new friend or future business partner. I want to give a very special thank you to Lisandra for joining us and for sharing her stories and her insights. It's been incredibly valuable, and we really, really appreciate it at UCW.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much. And I would also like to thank our team behind the scenes, including Alejandra Merigio, Media U, and the entire UCW LATAM team. Of course, Luciana Duarchi as well, who's been responding to all your questions in the chat. And thank you, everyone. Have a lovely evening.
Have a lovely evening. Thank you so much, everybody.